What happens when two dudes, one a retired Navy SEAL commander in Colorado Springs, and the other a hippie meditation teacher in New York City, get together to discuss living mindfully? That's a great question, because we don't know what will happen either. Raw, uncut, and unapologetic. Welcome to Men Talking Mindfulness with co-hosts John McCaskill and Will Schneider. Each week, we take an authentic dive into how mindfulness continually impacts our lives, deepens our relationships, and allows us to be emotionally alive. We filter all of our conversations through the man box, where we unpack how as men we are expected to act in society, how fighting the authentic human experience is exhausting and damaging, and how mindfulness can help. So happy you're tuning in to Men Talking Mindfulness. Now, on to the show.
That's right. All right. Hey, John McCaskill here with Men Talking Mindfulness and my brother from another mother, Will Schneider, over there in New York City. Thanks for joining us today. Always a pleasure to have you. We are going to be discussing a chapter in Liz Plank's book. The book is For the Love of Men. And the chapter that we're going to be covering today is the Mancession, not manscaping, but Mancession chapter. It is a fascinating chapter on how gender bias and toxic masculinity has led to a mancession and how men are more affected by the recession, and how we, with that toxic masculinity, we are setting men up, we are setting women up for disappointment, failure, and a detriment to society. So that said, Will, hey, I know we were planning on having Liz here today. We do, for the audience, we are planning on having her here on Monday. She ended up having a scheduling conflict that made her not able to be here today, but she'll be here on Monday. So we're going to discuss a chapter of the book, but on Monday, we're going to discuss much more in depth the full book with Liz. And this being that we didn't write this chapter, Will and I may stumble through some of this today, but bear with us because it's fascinating and very important material to cover, and we hope that that you can learn from that. Sorry, Will, I've kind of dominated the intro there. Over to you, brother. Anything?
No, that's okay. I mean, good to be here, John. Thank you for tuning in. We have, hey, this is, I think it's a moment of mindfulness for John and I and the show and all of us. Like, mindfulness is all about like going with what you got and pivoting in the moment if you need to. So Liz couldn't be here. Like John said, she'll be back on Monday. Just like a little, John and I are going to do the best we can to kind of understand more on a deeper level and help you understand this masculinity, toxic masculinity, this whole Mancession part of the book, which is like the recession of men in the workforce over the last like several decades. Because there's a lot in this chapter that's going to help us identify, this gender bias that we have between men and women, and what we can and can't do. So thanks for holding that space for us and being patient with us. And we'll have Liz here on Monday to help us to kind of unwrap and bring the expert in, because she has done an incredible amount of research in this book. And it's really like, John and I keep talking, off show about like how it's like, wow, I can't believe this. Wow, this is incredible. I had no idea like, this was going on. And I think what's important is to know that like John and I are coming from this from like, exactly that man box toxic masculinity vibe, because like I grew up a competitive athlete and all that kind of like masculine hive mentality of like bravado and conquering and success and destroying, your opponent and stuff like that. I mean, John, like you're come from like, God, of like the gladiator of all men in the United States, like kind of that, that Navy SEAL and the military. So just want to say thanks for everyone for being here today and going on this journey. And please, like, I think it's very important your participation here. Things you don't understand, things you identify with, and also like not to take things personal. Because you might actually feel, because I feel my defense going up when I'm reading Liz's book. I feel my defense is going up like, well, that's a bunch of BS, or like, what do you, because I feel challenged in some ways, with like understanding masculinity and what it could be versus like kind of where we are with masculinity and that whole idea and I still have trouble saying it, that whole toxic masculinity, because I don't want to think of myself as toxic, as a man,
Right.
but the values that I've been given and taught, and then even also exercised as a man, have definitely not created the results that what they could have been, being more holistic and wholehearted masculine man.
Right.
So
Yeah, and we'll get into a little bit more here in a second. I do want to touch on, one thing that she mentions, not in this chapter, but in the book, is that, that defense mechanism that you mentioned that kicks
yeah,
in. A lot
yeah,
of men take, the rise of women as an attack on us, on our
yeah,
masculinity and on manhood. But in reality, if we can lift women up, we lift ourselves up too.
right.
And what is it, the old saying, a rising tide lifts all boats, right?
Yeah,
Well,
I love
if we
that
can
quote.
if we can bring women up and close the gender gap in in the in pay that she talks about in this chapter, would bring 2.5 million people in the United States out of poverty, which is just
Wow.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
And when we raise women up, that does not mean that we're putting men down. So that's
Yeah.
another disclaimer there.
Yeah.
So that said, man, let's kick it off with our normal practice and then our
Yeah.
mindful moment for the week.
Okay.
You want to lead the first one, or should I?
I would, let me lead I'll do the grounding exercise. Be
Okay.
cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, so wherever you are, whether, listen to this on replay or right now, like if you're sitting or if you want to take a moment and lie down, or if you're standing up wherever you are and listening, just take a moment and, make some sort of contact with yourself, feel your feet on the floor, or if you can maybe even interlace your fingers just to kind of make contact there, and really coming into yourself, and then finding more of yourself by closing your eyes and releasing all that, that visual data that is streaming through our eyes, and just go on the inside. And then just take a couple breaths just to find this moment and find ourselves here and now. And also the breath helps us to relax mind, body, and emotionally. So let's just take a few big breaths. Start with an exhale and see if you can push all that breath out. Even pull the navel in to extinguish all that exhale. And then take a nice big inhale through the nose. Bigger, bigger. Try to fill a big balloon in your entire torso. And then just exhale through the nose, nice and smooth, long and softly. And notice how you can control your breath, right? Inhale again, controlling the volume of your inhale. See if you can find a bigger balloon, even just slightly on this breath. And then take a smoother exhale. Feel your spine, feel your hands, feel your feet. Again, big breath in. Exhale softly through the nose, long, exaggerated exhale. And a few more breaths. Bigger, if you will. Exhale. And just a couple more. God, it's around that fourth breath, John. I'm already starting to feel a little more relaxed. It's crazy how it works, And hope you're feeling, those who are listening, feeling that same kind of vibe out there. Exhale, let it go. And we'll just do one more. Inhale. And exhale. And let's just all try to collectively, for our work, and just set a collective intention of just being open and just receptive instead of like imposing beliefs or battling against. And instead of bringing up that shield that John kind of mentioned at the beginning to protect, what if you just, one of the key aspects of mindfulness and emotional intelligence is that vulnerability. So just being open during what we're going to talk about today. And that's going to help. Opening is going to help us to listen. And by listening and being vulnerable, maybe we'll hear something new. Let's just finish and try to open a little bit more with one more big breath in. And maybe exhale out the mouth. You'd be like, and release any residual stuff that's getting in the way of that openness. Awesome. Open those eyes when you're ready. Oh yeah, John. Let's go.
Man, I almost went to sleep on that one. That was
I know.
simple but calming, very calming.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
No, you're welcome.
Yeah, man. So it's pretty amazing just how just a few breaths, like where you're focusing on nothing but the breath, how that can completely change your perspective, change where you are in your mind and your nervous system and your body. But the mindful moment this week, last week for me, it had to do with my daughter. This week it has to do with my son, which is ironic, or maybe it's not ironic. Maybe it should be that way, being that we're discussing toxic masculinity. And I actually sent you an image of this earlier, Will, earlier this week. My my daughter and my wife, they're out of town. They're out at Lake Tahoe doing a girls trip, like a ski trip, and then it's me and my son staying at the house this week. And my son was running around the playroom and found a little princess dress. If you're familiar with the Frozen series, Anna and Elsa, he comes up anyway. He grabs a dress that is Anna's, which is the younger daughter in the Frozen movie. And he comes up and he's like, Anna, Anna, and I'm like, yeah, that's Anna's dress. And he's like, Anna, and I'm like, oh, he wants to wear the dress. And I put it on him, and I have to admit, well, I felt a little uncomfortable, which is what, some of what we're going to talk about today. But I felt uncomfortable putting a little princess dress on my 1.5-year-old boy. But then I took a step back. I'm like, I'm reading about this very subject matter right now, and here I am acting as though this is wrong. Which, hey, he's 1.5 years old. He doesn't care. He just wants to run around and wear a dress. So I put it on him, and he was laughing and giggling and having a grand old time. And I was like, man, that's my mindful moment for the week. Take a step back, realize if I don't put this dress on him, what am I teaching him? And if I do, what am I allowing him to experience? So that was my mindful moment for the week.
This is going to extend a little bit longer than we normally do, but I want to ask you, John, right now, and for the audience, for you, it's like, how do you feel about talking about that right now? You know what I mean?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I'm sure that we'll have people listening or watching later that will be like, what the heck is John teaching his son, right?
Yeah.
And because I'm perceiving what other people may be believing or thinking, there's a little bit of me that's like, oh man, what am I teaching my son? But luckily I have Liz's book, and I've read this recent, well, I've read the whole book, but I've read this chapter again recently in preparing for today's show. And it's showing me that by allowing our sons to do some things that little girls traditionally do, we're not necessarily feminizing our little boys, which even that statement in and of itself, feminizing our little boys, that's a terrible statement, because that implies that feminizing is weakening.
Right.
So I want to be clear. I'm not weakening my son by teaching him or having him run around in a dress that he wanted to wear. He is doing what he wanted to do. And, if he plays with a doll, and we'll get into this later in the show, he can learn love and empathy and compassion for other human beings. And that's a huge piece of what is important in the workforce. That's a huge piece of what is important as a good leader. And so taking a step back and realizing that I may be actually setting my son up for being a happier and healthier father, a happier and healthier young man, a happier and healthier man in the workforce, as a member of the workforce, or as a leader in the workforce. I feel great about it when I take a step back and I look at it through that lens.
Well, I think that perspective is really important, John, that grand view, like you said, we're going to dive into, and it's funny how we're going to really link like this Mancession, like the problems that men are having in the workforce because of masculine or toxic masculine or hyper masculine values. and how it's like eliminating, jobs for them, and also the emotional intelligence that is required, that actually elevates success. And the indicator of all success comes from emotional intelligence. So thanks for sharing that. I might have been a little uncomfortable, John, but
No, it was
I gotta
good.
say, like, we might as well confront it right now, to be honest with you, because it's like, this is like, we might be the, the sacrificial lamb in some ways, and just kind of like tearing down our own beliefs, and that's what it is, men talking mindfulness. And I didn't know that our, that this is kind of where to be going,
No, not at all.
but this is where we need to be. And this is all on also, John, this is vulnerability. Right now, us talking about this, and thanks for holding this space, and thanks for everybody for not, being with us on this journey. So my mindfulness moment of the week, I think it was really, it's like yesterday at like 2:00, Liz is like, her people are like, Liz can't make the show tomorrow. And us, I got to say, John, just so easily, brilliantly coming together, coming up with a new plan. Here we are today. And, just taking that moment, and instead of going into that mindset, or that like limited mindset of like, oh my God, and like, lambasting Liz and whatever she's doing, like, no, it's like, you know what? We have an opportunity to change, to make something happen here today. And, I'm really excited, to share what we are learning, and slowly beginning to, like you were just talking about, really help to change the life of your son.
I hope so.
And your family, and everyone else that your son's going to come in contact with. It's not just individual. It's like how this is, like how it affects our relationship, not just to ourselves, but everybody. And that's what's so really empowering about this. And so that's great. That's great. Awesome. So we're like, why don't we start?
Man, I'd love to kind of just riff off what where we started there, right? I mean, this isn't exactly how we plan on the discussion going, but because we talked about my little boy running around in a dress, and that's actually going to, I'm sure, come into play several times in this conversation. But one of the pieces that Liz starts this chapter off with is when she's giving a talk. And I know you have that part highlighted in your book there, and what she asks the audience. We've got some people here commenting and engaging on the LinkedIn Live version of this video. I would love to ask the audience those questions and see how they feel. So you want to kick off with that?
Yeah, I'll kick it off. And there's actually two highlights here, two pieces of what you had kind of, and I'm so glad we're making this personal, because and that we can really, like, wow, like, I'm just feeling a whole different vibe today, John. It's really, I feel like I have a responsibility or something, John. It's like, what's happening? It's like an uncharted territory for men talking mindfulness, and me as a man, I got to say. Where's it? Choose everything. Okay, wait, hold on. It's on 196. Okay, sorry. I'm just going to go back. So everybody out there listening, keep an open mind. This is Liz. I'm going to read a part of her book, and she says, our ideas about who we can become as career professionals start in childhood. After all, one of the first questions we ask children is, quote, what do we do, or what do you want to do when you grow up, end quote. When I speak to adult audiences, I usually start my talk by asking who has kids. After those people raise their hands, I tell them to keep their hands up if they have ever told their daughters that they can do anything that a boy can do. Most people proudly keep their hands raised. If you're out there, raise your hand, right?
Yeah.
Most people proudly keep their hands raised. When I ask who has told their son that they can do anything that a girl can do, the room goes silent, because almost every single hand goes down. Wow.
Yep.
I just want to double back on that with this. Oh boy, I'm sorry. I'm like fumbling through our book here. Is it 202? This is the one thing that, yes, there it is. Okay. This uneasiness with boys playing with anything that could be attributed or associated with girls relies on a steady fundamental belief that cuts across society. that being feminine is weakness. If what women did weren't so devalued, men would have no problem engaging or dabbling in any of it. If there's nothing wrong with femininity, no one would be worried about men exploring it, just like your son wearing a dress. In other words, the reason why we as a culture are scared of men acting like women is because we diminish the feminine. Whew.
Yeah.
I mean, like, let's let that land for a moment and take a breath, right? It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and that's just really kicks off, so much of this conversation. And so where do you want to go with that, John?
Yeah. I mean, well, I mean, I don't know if any of the audience is comfortable answering that question, but like you saw, I mean, I had my hand up. I have told my daughter, who granted she's 2 years older than my son, so she's almost 4. I've told my daughter, hey, baby, you can do anything that you want. You can do anything that a man can do. You can do anything that you want, period.
Yeah.
I have told my son in much less language because he's only just now learning how to speak, but I've told my son, hey, you want to, when there's an astronaut on the TV, I'm like, hey, you can do that. When there's a military member on the screen on the TV, I'm like, you can do that. But if there's a nurse or a teacher, I don't mention anything, right? And that's coming full circle where you talk about we've kind of equated femininity with weakness. Then that's what we've almost equated jobs of traditionally, or at least in the States, traditionally female jobs to weak jobs, which is what really caught me off guard was reading that these jobs that we typically associate with women, nursing, teaching, elderly care, were originally primarily men's jobs in the States.
Yeah, years ago.
But then somewhere along the line, politicians and teacher reformists or education reformists realized, you know what, we're paying the men this amount, but we could get away with paying women much less. Let's do that. Let's offer a much lower wage, wages that men were not prepared to accept. And in that, the jobs suddenly became more populated by women. So it's wild to read this chapter and see that, but then coming full circle to the toys, and it really blew me away reading this chapter, talking about the different. If you go to a toy store, you go to Walmart, even Walmart, you go to the toy section, and you've got boys aisles and girls aisles. But not only that, what is in those aisles, right? So I literally this week, again, with my son, went to Walmart and I was walking down the toy aisles just to see. I was like, you know what? I've never really paid attention. But you walk down the little boys aisle, quote unquote, what's traditionally a little boys aisle, and you see monster trucks and transformers and GI Joes and guns and all these weapons. You take the shopping cart right around the corner and you go into the traditionally girls aisle, and you see princesses and pink and purple and horses, and we are right there teaching our little boys and girls that there are defined gender differences. And not only are there defined gender differences, but we're teaching the little girl, hey, you can be a princess, or you can be work in the equine world, or be a nurse, but we're not teaching the little boys the same. And then you flip that around, we're teaching the little boys, hey, you've got to destroy and break things with all your guns and transformers and monsters. It's just wild. And I've never really thought about it or looked at it through that lens. So I've been rambling, man.
No, I mean, I could pick right up, John, because you bring up a lot. I mean, you bring up a lot. It's like, so just think about these toys, John. Like we get into, I don't have Liz breaks this down in very great language in the book, but just what you're talking about, boys and girls, I'm going to say a couple things. It's like by and one of the problems that we talked about as far as men being in the workforce is like men being unwilling to accept jobs that have been thought of as traditionally feminine, like that require empathy and compassion and kindness, and whereas like if we're walking down, like, I mean, we're walking down boys and girls aisles, which were not the norm, until about what they said, the 80s, right? I'm going to talk about that in Disney in a moment. But like, just think about, if we're just manual physical labor for boys and, guns and aggression and fighting, with military and stuff like that. So by playing with those toys, like what at such a young, incredibly impressionable age for children, are we kind of like emotions are we instilling in them at a young age? Aggression. We talk about this in our other, like last season, aggression and dominance and, and anger and how that's like, just acceptable. Whereas like, walking down, the women's aisles in Walmart. I mean, there's a lot of vanity and stuff like Barbies. I see people are blowing up our feed here about Barbies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But also like the feeling in the woman or girls aisle, right? Is more of that empathy, that compassion, taking care of things, dolls, and is it any wonder that we grow up as we do because of how we're raised and also boxed in gender roles at an earliest development and the most impressional development in our lives is those first 5 years of our life. But also, I think capitalism is also creating a lot of this division between genders. They in Liz's book, she does the research and talks about it wasn't until like the 80s and 90s that it was Disney that they started making billions of more dollars when they started masculizing or making toys, gearing toys towards boys and gearing toys and playthings to women or girls as well. And just think about it, like capitalism, it's all about making more money, right? A lot of these corporations at that time, I'm sure, were run by men. So like completely, and not even thinking, long term, like you kind of mentioned about your son, not even thinking about the social and societal impacts that this is going to have that we're talking about right now, right? Only gearing towards profit. And just think also that is still incredibly pervasive in our capitalistic society today. Instead of looking at fiduciary or like the responsibility of a company in a society and what is proliferating, is it all about profit, or should it be more about the people and society? So I just wanted to bring that up and how it's interesting. Like, you put advertising dollars, behind certain things, and you keep throwing that same message in commercials in front of people's faces again and again and again. All you're doing is just taking what we're talking about it and putting it in a marketing platform and advertising just to make profit, which is like that really blew my mind there too.
Absolutely, man. And I want to address some of the comments here.
Yeah.
One comment says, "I'm not sure if playing with Barbie at 2 years old shapes much of anything, nor do I believe telling a kid to play with G.I. Joe instead creates a toxic male. The point is, despite your influence, preference in toys isn't a value." And I'll be completely honest. When I was reading this initially, I was like, okay, Liz, what's your point about the toys? It's not that big a deal. But then she does further explain that those are your kids' very early stages when their brains are so malleable and everything that they are learning is learned in play.
Yeah.
So it can be, and I leave it open to you as viewers and listeners to potentially read this book if you care to, and see how this does in fact affect our brains at a very young age, as a 2-year-old, and what we are telling our little boys and girls by telling them which toys to play with, that's actually forming opinions of what gender should be doing what job, which comes full circle to the Mancession piece, and how the recession actually had more of an effect on men, because so many of the jobs that it affected ended up getting automated, and those jobs that were automatable, if that's a word. We're making up all sorts of words
Yeah,
today.
I know, right?
But yeah, so if we're those jobs that were all automated, they were more traditionally the men
Right.
jobs,
Yeah.
quote unquote, male
Mhm.
jobs, male dominated jobs. So like working on oil rigs, working on coal mines, working in factories,
Mhm.
those types of jobs. So the recession actually lasted, if you look at how it affected men versus women, it lasted longer for men than it did for women
Yeah.
because of what was accepted as a man's job. Men that had been working traditionally men's jobs after the recession was starting to come to an end, they could have gone and gotten other jobs, but they were not, one, they weren't seeing them as viable options, and two, if they did, they felt that if they applied, they would either be ostracized or they wouldn't have been accepted, but that for the job. If they had been accepted, then they would have been ostracized by their buddies who were coal miners or oil rig workers or factory workers. And I have nothing against any of those industries. I just want to be 100% clear here. I have utmost respect for anyone who is
Mhm.
out there working their butts off. But I also want to make sure that we show that there is a difference in how it can be perceived, those different jobs. So
Yeah.
and what's really funny, what she points out about the coal mining industry, and again, nothing against coal miners, but the industry could definitely use some overhauling and some probably some feminine influence. But they talks about how the industry actually made it almost cool to be this manly man in a mine, and made it weak to admit that you were struggling with the health effects of working in the mine. So the black lung, if you claimed anything, then you are weak. But it talks about, I think it's 1 in 5 is the number. 1 in 5 coal miners are affected by this, and
Yeah.
how dangerous that is, and how the industry has made it almost verboten to talk about the health effects, and not only verboten but feminine or weak
Yeah.
in doing that. So it's
Yeah.
pretty wild how, yeah, it can all be traced back to what we're teaching our young men and young women about what is and what isn't a male job or a
Yeah.
female job.
Yeah. Well, I actually, Mr. Graham brings up a good point, which I want to get to in a second, as far as like blue collar, and like strength of a man versus like, the strength of a woman. But what actually, I want to just jump back really quick, John, to kind of, or not jump back, like, you talked earlier, or someone talked about like toys at a young age, right? Liz brings up a great, and she's really done her homework on this book, John. Like, 'cause it's just like, oh wow, like I don't know how many people, and I think we'll ask her next week, or someone remind us out there how many people she actually interviewed for this book. I mean, it's got to be dozens, if not over 100 or more. So this is, they're talking about toys again. Um, and then there's two examples here. Can you imagine a boy learning to cook and care for others from an early age? The humanity. One man talks about the only present on the list of his seventh birthday being a blueberry muffin, a dog cupcake, which is essentially a stuffed puppy inside a cupcake. He remembered having a meltdown and crying so much when he didn't receive it that his father finally bought it for him, but instructed him to keep it hidden inside the house so no one would see him with it. Right? One more piece here. Another man recounted being only 5 when he was playing with a plastic toy shopping cart that happened to be pink. I carted it around, a quote, I carted it around our yard, moving my action figures and the like. He said, we were having a barbecue, and some of my dad's friends were teasing him that I was playing with a pink shopping cart. While I was distracted, they took it to the far back and smashed it and threw it in the trash. And I was like, wow. I mean, this is not only toxic masculinity from a societal pressure kind of view, I mean, talking to a very impressionable 5-year-old, or teaching him like, whoa, that's not something you do at a very young age. And how is that going to affect him later on? but I just thought that'd be interesting. Here's two stories about what we were talking about with toys having an impact on not just the child itself, but here are men, grown men being activated, and I guess that hyper masculinity kind of armor, being like challenged, and here they are doing something physically about it, and not really thinking about the long-term effects of that child at all.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the the effects that it has in them in the short term and long term.
Yeah.
And again, to address some comments here,
Yeah.
are we debating biology and the fact that men are typically physically stronger, so a lot of the time they go into the manual labor jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Not debating that. I agree that is a lot of the time what guides a man into a job is
Mm-hmm.
he may be physically stronger,
Mm-hmm.
but what are we teaching our young men about women if we teach that femininity is weakness? And that's what it comes straight back to what you talked about, the fact that when we see a little boy running around with a Barbie doll, or we see a little girl playing with a monster truck, most of the time nobody's going to tell a little girl, don't play with the monster truck. But many parents are going to tell that little boy, don't play with the Barbie doll. Don't play with the whatever the baking oven is, and don't play with the little dog in the blueberry muffin, because it's seen as feminine. And by seeing it as feminine, many of us toxic men are seeing that as weak. And that's what it kind of boils down to. No, we're not debating biology, but we definitely believe that what we're teaching could be refined, and we could teach our young men and young women strength and empathy and compassion by overhauling how we view femininity. So
yeah, to come back to the physiological, just the differences between men and women. I think it's like coming back to Arlie Graham here, what you're saying about blue collar workers. It's like, yeah, I mean, men are physically stronger and should do manual labor, but like when the problem is, and why we're having this problem with men in the workforce, there's a lot of, in the beginning of the chapter, really dives in about like where that problem comes from. But by just looking at men as like, okay, men can only do physical labor, I mean, if that's like, that doesn't mean, you can't go on and get educated and be a teacher or something like that. I mean, that's another highly dominated female profession, is education, like 90%. It's unbelievable. But it's like, but don't box ourselves in by only being able to exude physical strength and that like power, which brings us into that dominance and that anger and that like sense of masculinity, and it really like kind of up levels like our testosterone in some ways, because it feels great. I mean, I love being able to move stuff and and like do push-ups, and what I mean, I love that stuff about being a man. I mean, it's great. And like, and but like, but what are we missing? Like, I mean, the whole thing about this Mancession, it's like, if we're only being rewarded for what we can do because of our masculine power and physical prowess that we've been given, right? It's like, what are we missing on the other side? Because I have here, it's like, you said robots are really taking away so much of those physical jobs. And they're just going to, we're going to see a lot of that, John, coming out of this a COVID recession. You're just going to see automation be taken over, because it's like, it's like, if anything that is like a job that can be replaced by a robot, they're going to do it, because they're going to save money and they're going to make more money, and they don't have to pay insurance, and they don't have to have like, suggestion boxes and complaints sent to the HR office. You know what I mean? It's like, because the robot could just, upgrade.
And I understand that,
so
right?
Instead of us being, continually rewarded as men just for our physical prowess, it's like, and women just being, only or really rewarded or kind of boxed in jobs that are traditionally have more compassion and empathy and those types of things. Like it's like we're trying to, like, I guess, so, bring the spectrum of humanity, into the workforce, and not being kind of boxed in by other men saying what we can and can't do because of how things have been traditionally done. I mean, it's just not working,
Yeah.
John. It's just not
Right.
working.
Yeah.
So
No, it's not. And I want to progress further into a man's life or a
mhm.
person's life. We've talked a lot about early stages with the toys, but I also want to talk about how you talk about corporate America making money and everything. Well, some have tried to actually make some of these traditionally female jobs more appealing to men,
Mhm.
but their way of doing it has been very interesting. It's by further propagating the what is perceived as manly. So
Right.
Liz brings up an example where there was a billboard that said, "Are you manly enough to be a nurse?"
Yeah.
And it had it had men standing there with like snowboards and other quote unquote manly things. And what does that do? So it says that you have to be this. I won't say anybody that runs around with a snowboard or a gun or is necessarily a toxic male. And I won't say that all masculinity is toxic either. I pride myself in a level of masculinity,
Yeah.
but when that's what you're trying to sell to bring men into a job, then that might be sending the wrong message. And what we could be doing rather is saying, hey, do you want to learn to be empathetic? Do you have the
Right.
compassion that it takes to be a nurse, even though you're male? And that, I think, is the important distinction that we need to make, is that in in corporate America, in the world writ large, men can be compassionate, and being compassionate is not a feminine exclusive trait, and it is not a sign of weakness. And that's something that we've talked about in our show before. Compassion is actually a sign of strength, and compassion is required to be a good leader. To be a good leader, you need to understand what your people are feeling. You need to offer them psychologically safe spaces, and you need to be able to or want to do something about what it is they're feeling to improve their lives, to improve their situations. So not only does it offer you the ability to see more jobs if you're a
Mhm.
compassionate male,
Mhm.
but it also empowers you to perform better in those jobs
Yeah.
if you have the compassion. And that comes full circle back to what it is we're teaching. We're not teaching against biology. We're not teaching against nature, nurture. We're not necessarily having that discussion, at least not at the
Yeah.
extremes. But what we are doing is, what are we teaching our young men and young women about compassion, empathy,
Yeah.
and femininity versus weakness and strength?
Yeah. Well, a couple things come up for me, John. It's like that whole, like, are you man enough to be a nurse? Like, I mean, that sign right there, and now I'm sensitive to it, is immediately throwing women under the bus as weak. you know,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
immediately like going into, it's like, hey, um, and also it's like, indicator, you go, it's like, I love that we can just rely on, here's the numbers, here are the numbers, what drives success in the workplace is, and I say this to a lot of the companies I work with, IQ gets you hired, EQ gets you promoted. So if you want to be more
yeah,
successful, to develop that emotional intelligence, which is understanding, or not even understanding, learning to be compassionate, empathetic, learning to listen, learning to just hold space, and all those things that come with, um, there's some really great podcasts out there about emotional intelligence. And it's like, that's what it's going to take, because our manufacturing, industrial post World War II economy is slowly fading out, being replaced by automation we talked about. And now we're entering into a service economy. And how can you service people properly and successfully and abundantly, meaning making more money, if you're always trying to only speak to and be with one way of doing things?
right.
It's not like, hey, you can take hyper masculinity, toxic masculinity. You can make a whole business model on that, you know, and you could probably do it very well the way we can do echo chambers on the internet and stuff like that. But it's like, you know, I mean, it's you know, I get, you know, so I'm kind of, you know, talking out of two sides of my mouth here, but how is that going to make you feel at the end of the day? You know, it's
Right.
like, you know, and living in service economy, living in service of others, you know, that's that vulnerability. That's like, that's that, that biology that's inside of us that allows us to, that helps us to thrive, because we have those oxytocin and all these amazing hormones that help us to, you know, to literally like light up our biological and humanity in a lot of ways.
Right. Yeah.
Wow. This is
Yeah.
like, this has been a really good conversation, John, and
Yeah, man.
challenging in a lot
And
of ways.
I
I feel like,
see
yeah, go ahead.
the comments are blowing up. So I'm excited to see who will tune in on Monday when we do have Liz on the show. And you know, she's she's much better at explaining all the facts and figures. I mean, this book, as I was telling Will yesterday, is just so packed. It's so dense with the data,
Yeah.
with with the studies, and it's just it's mind blowing. So yeah, if you get a chance, please, you know, join us on Monday. Not that we're wrapping up just yet, but
Yeah.
I do want to,
Yeah.
you know, just put in another plug. I'm forgetting off the top of my head what time we were going to be on Monday,
Oh,
Will,
at
but
1:45 p.m. Monday Eastern time.
1:45 p.m. Eastern.
1:45
Okay,
Monday, which will be the 8th of February.
there you go. Thanks,
I just
man.
want to say
Thanks for
one thing
saving
about
me.
a comments. Like, people are
Yeah.
commenting on each other's comments. Like, be kind. Like, you know, like, I mean, I know Karen's like a big fan. I talked to Karen last Friday for a while. She's such a great woman, and she's a friend of
Yeah,
yours
she
too,
is.
John. You know, it's
Yeah.
like, you know, we get to, at this space, I think it's really important to remember that we get, everybody is welcome, every mind is welcome, and we get to really learn from each other. And the only way that we really learn is to create a space and an environment that, you know, we're, you know, that we can just be compassionate and be kind, and actually take a step back. And like, I love what you said in the very beginning, John, is like, instead of looking at trying to defend yourself now or defend your belief now, it's like, what if you look like a couple of days from now, or a couple of weeks from now, or like a couple of years from now, and how this topic right here, and all, like, it could be emotions that are coming up because of that toxic armor that's got to be in, like, you know, pinged a little bit with some of this language and what we're talking about and these concepts. What if you just be vulnerable, be open, just listen, right? What I love about mindfulness, John, and this is just the mindfulness kind of big moment for all of us, it's like how once I start to hear and learn and actually begin to experience, I take it with me, and then I start walking down the aisle of Walmart and be like, oh my God, here it is, right in my face, right in my face. Like, I hear it, and you know, I'm so much more sensitive to these concepts in all aspects of my life, because it's incredibly how deeply they're entrenched in our society, in almost every single place, to jobs, to
Yeah.
education, to you know, to the arts, you know, it's all there. It's unbelievable if you start looking at this masculinity, toxic masculinity, you know. But also, I mean, I think it's important, you know, of devaluing the strength of women, you know, and what they can do, and who women are. It's like, it's everywhere. I mean, I see it in my family, you know. I mean, now I can hear like old conversations I've had, or like ways that I've been taught. And in some ways it's like, wow, it's very, guys, it's very humbling, John. And I think that's why we're kind of like speaking in a very different tone today, because like, I feel like I'm just receiving a lesson, but also being very cautious and careful about like how I'm really talking about this, because it's all very new to me in so many ways, like so many ways.
For
So thanks for
sure.
holding the space, John. And you know,
Yeah.
I'm really happy and so love all the engagement we have today. And thank you for all your patience. Yeah, and you know, Graham, I know, actually, I just saw Graham's all over this. I just saw an
Yeah.
article, because I sit in the men's group every Monday, and the men came through because they're very also triggered by toxic masculinity. And there's an article, Graham, that I'll share with the group or on this page about toxic femininity. it's real too. I mean, it has to be, right? Because it's both sides. If there's extremes on one side, there's definitely extremes on the other, like 100%. So I'm going to share that too, Graham. And thanks for keeping this a real neutral, honest conversation, all of you. And we get to learn a little bit more from Liz on Monday. We're actually going to do, I'm really excited that this kind of turned into naturally a 3-part series. Where next Friday, we're going to have our show. We're going to do a recap what we learned. And all of you out there, bring your questions on Monday. We'll do the recap on Friday. Please. And again, before we share this, because this is really powerful stuff.
Yeah. I do definitely appreciate the comments, and I appreciate everyone being kind as we discuss something that is a little sensitive to talk about. Like Will and I kicked this off with, as we were reading this book, as we were reading separate parts of it, or certain parts of it, there were a lot of WTF moments. It's like, hey man, this is an attack on masculinity, which it's not necessarily an attack on masculinity. It is an attack on, or rather an adjustment for society. And I think there's a great movie out there. It's also really uncomfortable to watch. I think it's called Take the Blue Pill. And it's similar in that Liz is an overt feminist, but she has written this book for the love of men, and it has shown how we can improve as men, not to become more girly, but to become more in touch with the feminine aspects of life. And when I say feminine, what is normally associated with being feminine, and that is compassion, that is empathy, that is not necessarily exclusive to being a woman or to being feminine. You can have those feelings and emotions as a man. And the parallels between that and this movie, Take the Blue Pill, is it was actually and there's definitely some politics in the movie, but I'll say that it was started by a feminist. The movie was, it's a documentary where she goes and interviews a man that is very, I don't even know what you want to call him, but very toxic, or she sees him as toxic. But then she starts seeing some of the sides, many of the same things that Liz brings up in the book about how men die early, about how men go and do, traditionally, they go and do some of the more dangerous jobs, how men are more prone to taking risks. And Liz addresses that in her book. And it's amazing when she addresses why it is. It's really incredible. But anyway, that's another conversation. So, hey, thanks all for being here with us today. I'll lead us through our wrapping up practice, and then we'll call it done. If you're going to tune out now, go ahead, please. We'd love you to tune into the podcast on Apple iTunes or on Spotify, and give us a rating, give us a review, let us know what we're doing wrong, let us know what we're doing right.
Share this with your friends.
and share it with your friends, 100%. All right, so that said, let's do a compassion practice, and we've done one similar to this before. We've got a few minutes. Go ahead, get into a comfortable position. If you feel comfortable doing so, close your eyes, and then bring your attention. We're not even going to focus on the breath right now. We're going to focus on what it is that this conversation has brought up in you. What feelings and emotions has that brought up? Has that brought up a feeling of being attacked? Has it brought up a feeling of curiosity? Has it brought up feelings of compassion and empathy for your fellow human beings? And whatever it is you're feeling, just examine that. Be with it. And think about why that emotion, that feeling, bubbled to the surface. Is there a primary emotion that has led to a secondary emotion. And if what you're feeling is a secondary emotion, anger, rage, defense, peel back that onion for a second and take a look a little bit deeper and see if there is anything else that is driving that. And now put those emotions aside and visualize 3 people. Someone you love, someone for whom you have neutral feelings, and someone for whom you have negative feelings. And imagine on each breath out that you are sending love and compassion to all 3 of these people in the same way. Breathing out, sending love and compassion. And as you breathe in, take away from all 3 pain, heartache, discomfort. Breathe that in from them and let that dissipate from you. Breathing out, sending love and compassion. Breathing in, taking away pain and heartache. Breathing out, love and compassion. And breathing in and taking away their pain and heartache. We'll wrap this up with one last deep cleansing breath. Begin by breathing out all your air. Breathe deep into your belly, into your chest. Hold it for a second. And relax, letting everything go. Breathing out, breathing all that air out. And when you're ready, go ahead and conclude the practice. All right. Will, pleasure, bud.
Wow,
Thanks
John,
so much, man.
I still feel uncomfortable. It's weird. I don't know. It's like, I mean, thanks,
Yeah,
John. Like this is
it is.
really,
It's an uncomfortable topic, man, but it's I think it's important discussions to be had.
Yeah.
And we hope that you can all join us on Monday to have a further discussion on this very topic in much more detail with Liz. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Everybody have a wonderful weekend.
Yeah.
Take
Hey, thank
care.
you, John. Thank you, everybody out there. And got you on Monday.
Yes,
Thank you
sir.
so much. Peace.
Thanks for joining Will and John on Men Talking Mindfulness. If you enjoyed the show, please like and share it with your friends and family, and please, we would appreciate a review too. Until next time, this has been Men Talking Mindfulness. Thanks for showing up.